Hello guys and welcome back to the LFC Transfer Room. Today we have an expert analysis on the Liverpool linked Crystal Palace midfielder Cheick Doucoure. We're joined by Dan from HLTCO, a Crystal Palace site and YouTube channel. So make sure you go in the description below and check him out. Does other stuff, Premier League content, as well as Crystal Palace. So definitely worth checking out. But let's get right into the video. So for those who don't really know too much about Doucoure, can you give us a bit of an insight on his game and what he's been like for Crystal Palace since joining?
Cheik came in to Palace from Lens at the back end, I suppose, the summer of 22-23. Spent the whole of last year in the Palace first team. It's fair to say that he wasn't immediately the player that he became, but he pretty much throughout the entirety of last season was just doing the role of almost two defensive midfielders at once. He's incredibly energetic. He's a fantastic reader of play. He's pretty much the stereotypical defensive midfield engine that everyone wants. I've seen a fair few Liverpool fans over the last 24 hours online talking about the fact that he's not the best passer. I'm not quite sure where that has come from because, to be honest, his passing has never really been something that has been more than about an 8 out of 10 or lower than a 7. He's very, very consistent in almost everything he does. There were a couple of moments last season where he lost his head a little bit in terms of rash challenges, but for the most part, he is the absolute model of consistency. And as I say, he was pretty much doing the job of two defensive midfielders at once for us across last season, and he won our Player of the Year as a consequence of it.
Yeah, obviously, you've just mentioned the Player of the Year there. Won it ahead of the likes of Elise, Zaha, Eze, who all had great seasons. Obviously, 1 year at the club. Hard to maybe compare legacy, but in terms of quality, how does he compare to other midfielders that Palace have had in the Premier League? Is he one of the best even after 1 year, or is he still maybe on a way to go?
I think from a defensive midfield perspective, there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that in the Premier League era, he is the best we have had. Obviously, you could argue that our stay in the Premier League hasn't been near the top of the table and we've always been fighting relegation or in the bottom half. But in terms of his ceiling, I think he's 23, 24 years old. He has all sorts of room for potential growth in his game. That's exactly why we spent the money to bring him in from Lens in the first place. But I think even as Palace fans, we've been a little bit surprised by how well he has adapted to the Premier League. It took him, not that he started badly, far from it, but it took him probably 4 to 6 weeks to get truly up to speed with the way that the Premier League works. But from that point on, he's pretty much just accelerated away from everyone else in terms of expectations. But personally for me, I know Michael Elise grabs all sorts of headlines and Abire Eze is, a beautiful footballer to watch from a neutral perspective. I was torn 50-50 between Mark Gay and Cheick Doucoure getting the Player of the Year last season. I wouldn't have been against either one of them getting it, but seeing the fact that it was Cheick Doucoure's first season at the club, I think he performed so well and in a role where it was so pivotal for us that, I don't think anyone could have had any complaints with him getting that Player of the Year.
Yeah, obviously one of the games where Doucoure stood out last season was probably in the 1-1 draw at Anfield. From looking back at it, I might have seen how good he was, but some of the challenges he was putting in the interceptions. On kind of the flip side, do you think he would fit well for Liverpool? We've lost Fabinho, who was a very hard tackle in midfielder, tackles, interceptions, that was his main game. Do you think he would fit well under Jurgen Klopp at Liverpool?
I do think, if you look at his game, I appreciate, particularly in a modern style, you can have midfielders that are all action. They're sort of a 6, an 8 and a 10 in one a lot of the time. Whereas Cheik is, I would say, more suited to that defensive midfield role than anything else. He can advance the play, but he's not someone that will look to drive forward 30 or 40 yards with a ball in a run regularly. But he is just a great facilitator of everyone around him. He reads the game so well. And there have been many times across his first season with us where there's been a transition of play and we've looked a little bit up against it and he's put in a big tackle or he's just shepherded a player off at exactly the right moment and enabled us to reset. And now that we've got Jefferson Lerma in there next to him as part of that defensive midfield unit, I mean, we saw it, admittedly, Sheffield United on the first game isn't a litmus test for some of the quality opposition you're going to come up against in the Premier League, but we were so much in control in the midfield. And I do think going into this season, if we can keep Doucoure and Jefferson Lerma together as a pairing, then we're going to be extremely solid in terms of the spine of the team with Gay and Anderson just behind.
Yeah, we've talked about, some of his strengths, what he's good at. What, obviously still very young, 23 years old, got hopefully a very successful career ahead of him. What are some things that he needs to work on, to improve his game, to really take him up to that next level to become one of the world's best defensive mids?
Well, I mentioned it a few minutes ago. He has had occasional moments of sort of hot-headedness. There was a red card that he picked up away at Aston Villa. This was towards the end of Patrick Vieira's reign, by the way. And we played away at Brighton. I'm sure many Liverpool fans will be aware, even if they don't necessarily understand it, that Palace and Brighton is a very heated rivalry. And he got a yellow card in that game and put in another very, very risky challenge straight after. The referee, and I hold my hands up to this, completely bottled it, should have sent him off. And that was just after he'd returned from the initial ban that he picked up against Aston Villa. But I suppose if you zoom out a little bit and you look towards the way the club was prior to Patrick Vieira's dismissal, I do wonder whether or not there was a lack of clear tactical process coming from the coaching staff towards him. Because since Roy Hodgson came in, who is, I appreciate Liverpool fans don't exactly think particularly warmly of Roy, but his way of working is very tactically rigid and everyone knows their jobs within an inch of its life. I think he has really flourished in that. And I think he really has, you mentioned it, he's a young lad still learning his way in the Premier League. I think Roy Hodgson's sort of granular approach to coaching has really helped him to make sure that he does exactly what is required of him week after week. And I'm sure it would be no different if he were to move to Liverpool and play under Jurgen Klopp.
Yeah. Something I want to kind of clear up, having a Palace fan on, there's been a lot of talk about Palace potentially needing money. I know the whole thing with Elise, which happened this morning when we were recording this, just signed a new contract, Chelsea were going to be reported if he didn't pull out of it. Whole massive saga. But do you think with Elise staying, it potentially opens the door a little bit more for Doucoure leaving? Or do you think it's a non-starter still and he will stay?
I just can't envisage a situation where Cheick Doucoure leaves at this stage of the window. I mean, so you've got to appreciate, with Wilfried Zaha going, I can't overstate the importance of Wilfried Zaha to this football club. And the fact that we were prepared to offer him a 4-year contract on 200 grand a week at 30 speaks volumes for a club of our size. If you extrapolate that across the 4 years of the deal, should he have taken it rather than going to Turkey, that's £41.6 million, which is obviously a huge amount of money for a club like us to potentially outlay. We had a transfer budget already. Obviously, the 40-odd mil that is now not going to Wilfried Zaha, a section of that has probably been pushed towards Michael with this new contract. But I think it can be easily sort of misconstrued that we need money. At the end of the day, the model that we have gone down with the signings of Eze, Elise, Gay, Doucoure, etc., is very much by young players with huge potential and high ceilings that we can then sell off in the fullness of time for hopefully astronomical sums. But given the outlay that we spent on Cheick Doucoure when he came in last summer, given his importance to the side, I mean, I'm not just saying this because we're talking about him specifically. He genuinely is the most important player in our squad. There is no part of me that thinks otherwise. So to lose him for whatever fee might come in with 2 weeks left to go in the window would leave us with a huge headache. It would leave the squad, who've already lost Wilfried Zaha, reeling. And we would then have to try and replace his impact with everyone knowing exactly how much money we had burning a hole in our pocket from a market perspective as well. So I just can't see it. I think if you're going to have a situation where Cheick Doucoure does leave, it's likely to be at the beginning of next summer or the summer after, because there is no release clause. He isn't going to throw his toys out of the pram and decide that he doesn't want to play for Crystal Palace anymore with 2 weeks to go in the window. So the only way that I can see it working is if we get a very solid fee at the start of a summer window, rather than leaving it so it's a mad dash to try and replace him, because I just don't think we're going to be able to do that given the time sensitive nature of it.
Yeah, we've discussed this next question a little bit on Twitter, but for the people on YouTube, obviously Palace know that Liverpool have 115 million to spend. You know, we've shown our cards and it backfired with Caicedo. So a bit of a two-part question. How much is Doucoure worth to Palace? And how much do you think realistically it would take for Palace to be like, okay, this is a serious fee. We might have to accept it.
I mean, obviously, it's a shift in sands thing based on the timing of it. But right now, I honestly believe you would be starting at 100 plus. I genuinely do, and that might seem outlandish, but I mean, I say it a lot. Transfers are all related to the timings and circumstances around the clubs you're talking about. And for us to lose our player of the year from last season, who's on a long contract, who doesn't have a release clause, who is pivotal to our ability to have stability in the squad, with Wilfried Zaha having already gone and Jefferson Lerma coming in as a complementary piece to the squad alongside him, it would take an astronomical sum. I mean, I saw people yesterday on Twitter, because of the Miguel Delaney piece in The Independent, suggesting that you'd be able to get him for 60. And I don't want to, just blow it out. It's just not going to happen. There's no part of me that thinks we would entertain anything less than £5 to £100 million, and possibly even more. Because, as I just alluded to, if you go into a 2-week period as a club like Crystal Palace, knowing you have to source a replacement, you're going to end up in a situation where you're getting charged a premium of £10 or £20 million on top. And unfortunately, from Liverpool's perspective, the fact that you put that offer in for Caicedo has almost revealed the true picture for everyone else. And I don't see why Steve Parish, who's clearly worked some sort of mad alchemy to get Michael Elise to turn away from Chelsea and sign that new contract just today, is going to suddenly go, oh, actually, we'll allow our most important player to leave with 12 days to go in the window. I just don't think it's going to work.
Yeah, and finally, I know we've touched on it a little bit, but do you think Liverpool would be a good place, culture, I can't speak. Do you think it would be a good place for Doucoure to show his next level? Or do you think maybe it might be better for him staying maybe at a bit of a mid to top end club and honing his skills for the next few years before making a big move?
I think, it's always easy to look at it with red and blue tinted glasses from my perspective as a Palace fan. But as I mentioned a few minutes ago, I'm under no illusions. A lot of the players that we've signed, have come to Crystal Palace to showcase their abilities to be Premier League footballers and to get up the food chain. We've seen it with Spurs and Harry Kane in the last week or two. He's been there however many years and he's still gone to Bayern Munich to win things. There are very few clubs in world football that are immune from that. And we are not one of those. There's no doubt about it. But at the same time, I do feel like it's easy to assume that because he's had 1 year in which he's been so fantastic that he doesn't have anything left to learn. But there is always something you can improve in your game, particularly as a defensive midfielder, because it's a part of the pitch that is constantly evolving in terms of systems and trying to screen in front of back fours. And I do genuinely believe that in Roy Hodgson, he would have a fantastic coach across this whole season to continue that. So with 4 years left on his deal and no release fee, I just don't see a scenario where he will even view it as the right thing for him at this particular point. Not to suggest that at the start of next summer or the one after, he wouldn't be an ideal player for Liverpool to get and wouldn't feel like it was the right time for him. I think, if we were to accept a bid, he would of course go, but I also don't think he's going to throw his toys out of the pram and do a Willie Nyonta and refuse to play, because he just doesn't strike me as that sort. And I think he understands that he is pretty much the first name on the team sheet anyway. So I just feel it's a non-starter, really.
Thank you very much to Dan for joining us today. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. We're on the road to 10,000 subscribers, so it would be massively appreciative if you could. Also, if you know anybody who would like the content, make sure to share. But I've been Charlie, this has been the LFC Transfer Room, and thank you for watching.